PurpleSpace Confident Conversations, hosted by Kate Nash, OBE, with guest Belinda May, partner and co-chair of Denton's Disability Accessibility Inclusion Group.
I first met Belinda when Denton's, the global law firm, first joined PurpleSpace, and I was immediately struck by her ability to practice compassion in all her interactions. That's not something you immediately assume is a gift with lawyers, just saying. Belinda is a true ambassador for inner confidence and compassion, which you'll hear her describe as being like oxygen. She enables us to have, I suppose, the freedom to be and to explore who we are. In our conversation, Belinda speaks candidly about her life before and after diagnosis of Addison's disease, and sharing with truth and with power these very difficult life moments where we have to navigate disability, ill health, neurodivergence or difference. Initially having hopes of being a flight attendant, Belinda became fascinated by law and decided to take, in her mind, the safer route by studying to become a lawyer. At the height of her career as partner at Denton's, she received her diagnosis and has been on a journey of awareness and discovery, self-acceptance and building inner confidence. Belinda started Denton's Disability Accessibility Employee Resource Group and secured a number of leadership positions both inside and outside of the organisation, including her appointment as one of the PurpleSpace ambassadors. I think you will be moved by Belinda's story, her passion, and indeed her drive, and come away with some ideas to try. I particularly loved her description of seeing her diagnosis as a kind of internal gift of awareness, which she feels has led to her many, many successes in her life. These interviews are brought to you with warm thanks to remarkable people choosing to share their learning, their stories about inner confidence so that others can learn faster and we can help others who come behind us. Once you have listened, I ask one thing of you, and that is that you send the link to 5 others who too may be able to cascade the links to 5 others so that we can continue to cascade. We're on a mission at PurpleSpace to cascade a universal definition of inner confidence, which for us is a strong expectation of a positive outcome, and to share the very practical things that we can do as individuals to navigate our working worlds while managing disability and all the things that comes with. Enjoy this film. My sister from another mother, from across the pond. How lovely to see you again.
It's great to see you, Kate. I miss you.
Ditto, ditto. Well, look, I'm so thrilled that you've agreed to join me in this new podcast series, which is really designed to get under the covers around the ways in which we build our inner confidence, which often comes over time. And I suppose my first question to you, it's an open question, but our listeners would have rocked up for a reason. And in your mind, given that our listeners would have heard what you do and how you do it and your extraordinary career as a lawyer, your journey, the things that you've achieved, why do you think that this subject should matter to them? What is it about building confidence through an extraordinary career that requires listeners who may also have lived experience to notice and to join us? What do you think is on their minds?
Kate, the question is critical. Inner confidence for me, I can only speak for me, but the fact is I believe that our shared experience, people who have disabilities, no matter when they occur in our lives, sometimes layered by multiple disabilities or diseases or access limiting conditions. I believe that inner confidence is oxygen. I fully believe that for us, the process, and we don't get there overnight, that's for sure, as you mentioned. And shoot, after this podcast or our discussion, I could find myself in a not great place. That happens. That's life. That's part of the process. It's the journey. But inner confidence for us is oxygen. It enables us to breathe in our lives. It gives us freedom. It gives us the freedom to explore who we are. Perhaps those identities change over time. I know mine have. And to take a look backwards, assimilate the past, the experiences, the present, the future, and then hopefully stay in the present so that we can take one small action at a time. And today, that is sharing my story with you, my friend.
Wonderful. So let's kick off, Belinda, and maybe start at the beginning. This podcast series is designed to help anybody with any type of lived experience of disability or mental ill health or neurodivergence or deafness. And of course, many different experiences come from very many different places. They may be through trauma, they may be experiences that we've had since birth or shortly after birth, or in our childhood or teenage, or indeed our adult and careers. So our audience here today and beyond today will come from a very different backgrounds. So for us, take us from the beginning, take us to those moments when you first realized that you were going to have to deal with difficult emotions as you lived your life. Where were the moments? Where were the key stories?
When we first talked about this, I promised you grit, because there's grit in all our stories. I also promised you the truth for several reasons. First of all, we can't change the truth. Truth is the truth. It's our own. And the more willing we become to embrace it, the more willing or the more able we are to live a life where a positive outcome can be expected. More on that later, because sometimes that outcome is very different than what we had originally envisioned. And sometimes it's much bigger and much better than we had originally envisioned. But starting from the beginning, the fact is I don't remember ever having a memory where I didn't feel I was defective. I don't remember ever feeling like I belonged, even as a small child. There are so many early childhood recollections that start in more of an idyllic way, whether it's the holidays or feeling special on a birthday or something like that. But by the time I was 5, my mother had become ill, and I was born 13 years into their marriage, and they had thought they couldn't have children. I think, although that's a subject of debate, but the long and the short of it is, she was an older mom, and based on my age, that was uncommon in the 1960s. So by the time I'm 5, she was beginning to experience menopause. And in those days, to say that there was inadequate health care or treatment or public acceptance of mental illness or menopause would be a mild understatement. We may be making inroads today, but we've a long ways to go. The other aspect of her illness was because both of her brothers had died in World War II, and my grandmother blamed my mom. So by the time I'm 5, I'm taking actions, whether it's getting out poster board, listing all of the things that I will do if she will just be happy and smile. Or at Christmas time, this is a little later, maybe I'm in 3rd or 4th grade, she had become very, very unpredictable and bizarre behaviors. And so I have a younger sister, and what I learned to do was get an X-Acto knife out and unwrap the presents under the tree, so that I could warn my sister and myself, so that we wouldn't be shocked, and so that we could respond appropriately, so that we wouldn't, well, frankly, set her off. And that wasn't an anger or rage place. It was tears and sadness. Now, my mother died by suicide by the time I was 17. And it's just so important to tell the truth to our audience. So I must tell you that it was a relief. Now that's grit. The relief wasn't cruel, but the relief was that I felt like I could at least stand down.
Yeah.
I could at least stand down. And so I made a bargain with the then God of my understanding. I don't recommend bargains of that nature, by the way. Not wise. I said, well, okay. Mom's out of pain now. And in many ways, our family is out of pain. But don't take my dad. Just don't take my dad. So 3 years later, my dad died. And from then on, I was on my own.
So you're at this age, 20, 21?
Yes. So then it was actually on my own, but certainly in many ways since the time I had been 5. And so 2 takeaways that I'd like to share. The first is that I later realized that, and I should tell you that I actually have an extraordinary relationship with my mother today. People might see me sitting outside having a cup of tea or coffee, talking out loud, and I'm maybe having a discussion with my mother, who I feel quite close to. I feel I understand her today, and I feel understood and loved by her. But that was a long time ago, 39 years ago, and so it's taken a hot minute, right? But the other takeaway that I think is so important is the lesson that I learned, and that was to see around corners. I'm going to say that again. I learned the skill of predicting what was coming and being prepared always for the sky is falling, for the very worst.
Belinda, this is so powerful. I know our listeners will be riveted because you share so candidly and with such truth, such power, these unflinching, very difficult stories. your line that you look around corners, I've heard you share that before. You see around corners. Again, I imagine that's very similar to many people. Very, very powerful. Our audience have heard your extraordinary plaudits. You're absolutely incredible lawyer, partner in a firm, global multinational. My first question is why law? What is it about your default personality, your characteristics? Why did you go into law? How did that happen?
And the fact is I knew in college, again, my father had just passed, that I could maintain high marks, and I could do school, and I could hide from the pain very well. Had that down. I knew how to do that. By chance, I happened to take a constitutional, or perhaps you would say parliamentary, law course, and this is the part that I'm proud of. I fell in love with our Constitution. I was in other documents, ancient documents, going back to the beginning of time, actually, that speak to the golden rule in many ways, whether it's the civil law or the criminal law. And so I was fascinated, and so I was presented with a choice: go out and get a job. And at that time, or I had applied to law school and had been accepted, because I had found this passion in the true genius of these writers for so many years ago. And so I was sitting on my apartment building, the roof of my apartment building, and I thought, well, gonna need to make a choice. School starts next week. And I had applications out to be a flight attendant. I wanted to fly globally and see the world. And that, I thought, would be fantastic. That was the only job I really wanted. But I thought, no, for me, the safer route is school.
Yeah.
The safer route, I'm going to choose that, for me, the easier, softer way, and continue to go to school because I understand that program and I can continue to hide from the pain from my past. So that's what I did.
Wow. The die was cast.
And by the way, my younger sister is a flight attendant.
We shared it in the family anyway.
So yeah, right. Well, and my husband is an airline captain, so perhaps by osmosis, and then in my job took and takes me all over the world. So I think it's important, though, to get back to the seeing around corners.
Yeah.
What I learned from growing up was that there's always a solution. And that was a positive. That was a net positive. My dad was a mathematics professor, a PhD. By the way, I inherited none of that. That's why I'm a lawyer, I suppose, and not a doctor. But in any way, he would always say that he would look forward to the beginning of the next semester versus the end of the current one. And so I also was instilled with that belief system that there's always a solution. It's just that until much later in my life, I wasn't operating with the solution from a place of awareness. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
In fact, it wasn't until my diagnosis and my disability that I think I was given the gift, as I see it today.
Yeah.
Not back then, but as I see it today, the gift of awareness.
Well, let's fast forward then, Belinda. You know, you shared early part of your career, you're still navigating to a certain extent trauma, and then later in your career, tell us about the diagnosis that you've had, which, you know, layers challenge, and then I'd be keen to hear your thoughts about how you've built and continue to build inner confidence with this, you know, layering of disabilities and challenges.
I'll try to do that because like I said, I promised you the truth and I promised you grit. So by this time, I was extremely successful in my career. Um, um, I had a facility or a gift for seeing the perspectives of others and all the stakeholders at the table. And thanks to my parents, really. I don't take credit for that. But I had a gift for reaching a positive outcome or reaching a solution that worked for all stakeholders, because I was able to see those points of view and then bring them together. So at the top of my career, I was billing about 3,000 hours a year and working another 1,000 for a total of 4,000. You can do the math and add that up. That
Huge.
meant and an illness in itself, and probably a contributor to my own diagnosis. So in 2019, at the top of this career, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening disease that's rare and for which there is no cure. And because it's rare, it's not particularly interesting to Big Pharma because there aren't enough people that have it to cure it. And so the medication that keeps me alive does oftentimes more harm than good. What do I mean by that? Well, people with my disease, about 10% of us are essentially allergic to the medicine that keeps us alive, Kate. And so I'm one of those 10%. And I didn't know that at first. At first, I thought, well, you know, okay, I have this diagnosis. It explains why I was a frequent flyer at the emergency department. It explains why all the blood pressure crashes. It explains, and by the way, I should admit that when I would go to the emergency room, and my dearest friend who would accompany me when I would pass out, we would always take a souvenir. So I should admit that, really, whether that was a rubber glove or, you know, some tape or whatever. I probably owe an amends to many emergency departments, but I promise I never took anything other than disposables. But anyway, so I just assumed that I'd be fine. I'd take the medication and everything would just be fine. But then the problems started because the medication attacked the rest of my body, and by that I mean about 20 surgeries on my left leg, about 5 eye surgeries. The medication attacks my everything, every organ, my skin. I constantly have a form of skin cancer, not melanoma. And so my disease sometimes looks like a wheelchair. It attacks joints, so lots of surgeries. I keep a cane in my car because I never know. I'm very, very careful. Today I do not have gloves on, but I'm very, very, very careful to avoid bumping into anything, because if I do, certainly a blood ulcer will arise. And so
Tell me about how that's impacted you at work, in that what have been your, I mean, our audience, so some will need workplace adjustments. Sometimes that's kit and gizmos. Sometimes that's the soft adjustments, requiring others to do things differently around us.
Yep.
So for you, what has that meant, and how have you drawn on your skills and your strength to sometimes ask for things that are hard to ask for, or indeed where you've had reactions that are deeply uncomfortable? You know, how do you push back? How do you display your grit?
Boy, that has been an evolutionary process, because the disease itself has been evolutionary.
Yeah.
At first, I knew, I already knew that the extreme nature of 15-hour days wasn't healthy anyway, and people in my organization agreed with that. Now, it's a little complicated and tricky, because the kind of law I practice is inherently emergency based. And so we don't always have the choice when we need to get on an airplane and get to someplace, to engineering or to a manufacturing facility quickly. But my firm was tremendous about saying, yes, you need to work less. But I ran into a problem as my disease progressed, because running at 0% cortisol means that I have nothing in my system, right, to tell my heart to beat, to tell my lungs to operate. As the disease progressed, and still does, as you know from the last time we were together, it became more difficult, because I had to significantly alter my work, which impacted my compensation. And I don't think I would still be in the legal profession were it not for being asked by our then new DEI leader to be the chair of our disability accessibility ERG. And my hat is off to our DEI leadership. Oftentimes law firms are not necessarily synonymous with compassion, but I have experienced compassion in my ERG, and being an ERG now co-chair with two of my colleagues was the pivot, the absolute pivot in this journey of awareness, and which we can call self-acceptance, we can call it inner confidence, we can call it a willingness to share our stories, to tell the truth, all of those things. So I felt encouraged, and that led to a number of other leadership positions inside my organization and outside the organization. And one of the things I'm most proud of actually is being an ambassador of PurpleSpace. But that didn't happen overnight, and that doesn't mean that it wasn't difficult for some leaders to understand the disability.
Yeah.
And I think that for our listeners and viewers, to say that this was a walk in the park, I don't want to leave anyone with that impression. It wasn't.
Yeah.
But more than anything, the reasonable accommodation process can't be started unless we ask.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to ask.
I want to tuck into this, Belinda. So as you know, and we are so deeply grateful for your ambassadorship of PurpleSpace. But we've launched a series of guides, Confident Conversations. And of course, this podcast series is designed to support people to think deeply about the things that sometimes we need to do in order to build better life circumstances around us. We know there's challenges. We know that there are barriers. We know that there are deep illegalities still. Of course, we know that.
Right.
But nonetheless, in terms of our own ability to sometimes self-determine the direction of our lives is deeply necessary. But in those guides, you know that we created those 6 fundamentals and the 6 hurdles, and of those, are there any that particularly speak to you?
That's a great big yes. This really is an inside job. Inner confidence is absolutely an inside job. And so the first fundamental for me is the foundation upon which all others are built. And that is the process of self-identity, making sense of it, assimilating it. And that means inside us, we must embrace our own truth and undertake the care that we need. And that again, that goes back to my mom. What care wasn't available to her in the 1980s and in the 70s, but it is available today. And so if we are willing, and willingness is such a key word, if we are willing to make a mistake, if we are willing to open the door just a little bit, to take a look at our disability, what that disability means to us, what it doesn't mean to us, how it shapes every aspect of our lives. And, you know, a very wise woman once said, you know, in taking a look at my disability, I'm glad no one told me everything would get better, because it hasn't. But it has all gotten different. It has all gotten different, and in most cases, better. And so even when I thought the sky was falling and I didn't know who I was anymore, I wasn't that same lawyer out there going 100 miles an hour, my body couldn't. Now, I was just willful enough, which is also a theme that runs through this all. I was just willful enough to think that I could do it anyway. And that produced the consequences you would imagine, which was getting sicker. And so it's in the assimilation of where we are, and inch by inch being willing to share our stories. And we do that in our ERG. We have a signature event we do every year and produce, and it's been so important to draw from every aspect of the firm. Sometimes people think of lawyers as big fat cat lawyers. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth, honestly. Or barristers, solicitors. The fact is the people that make and keep the lights on are the people who are not on the front lines. And so it's so important to embrace every part of our colleagues' experience in an ERG. And so in that identity process, creating a safe space for us to share just a little bit then enables us to experience, whether in my case, it's a feeling of, and again, hearkening back to that horrible place when my mother died by suicide. That was a very, very traumatic sort of relief. Today's relief is different and healthy in that after I had shared my experience, strength, and hope for someone else,
Yeah,
including the part that hurts. Physically, Kate, every day. Mentally, my heart, the whole shebang. I feel better. And so it's that fundamental one
yeah,
that is the basis that allows us to open the door to developing that confidence
yeah.
in our work and in our lives.
I love it. that process of assimilation. What about the hurdle? Which one of the hurdles spoke to you, or felt even that you still need to perhaps challenge yourself or deal with?
Well, I'm again going to go with the first one. Because I think there's symbiosis between them. I think they you can't have one without the other, and that is the self-doubt. And I wanted to talk about that today because we'll get off this conversation that we're having and sharing together as close friends. And I assure you that it'll take me about a nanosecond to wonder if I did a good job and to wonder if I've helped even one person. And that's what I care the most about, including my kid, the one with autism and other neurodiverse conditions. And so, and I want to get to a word about compassion as well in a moment, but the hurdle of self-doubt, of doubting ourselves, of asking, well, no one will listen to me anyway, which is another way of saying I don't count. The fact is that isn't the truth. And you can't change the truth. And so it's a myth. It's a myth that we've told ourselves for so long. For me, by the time I'm 5 and virtually and actually by the time I'm 20, the truth that I assumed was true was I'm on my own. I have to do it all. If I don't, then nothing will happen. So I will do whatever it takes to get through life. Life is hard. And so it never occurred to me until what is now the gift of my diagnosis that I could actually have and lead a life that is authentic. There's just no way anybody can honestly say, hey, I'm so glad that I could code blue today.
Yeah.
That's not accurate, and that's not what I mean. And I know you know that, and I know that our viewers know that. But the fact is the richness of leaving self-doubt behind, or more accurately, noticing the self-doubt and then saying, hey, you know what? I don't think so. I'm going to choose to go a different direction right now.
Love it.
In my awareness. And so I believe that the fundamental of the process of self-identification and assimilation, making sense of where we've been, where we are, where we're going, but always staying in the present, that's the key, fits very neatly with that first hurdle, which is our default back to old belief systems that A, aren't accurate, and B, don't serve us.
I hear you. Building on this, Belinda, just thinking, I mean, what you're describing, the longer we live, the more we learn about how it is to live with disability and how we can support others to overcome some of the things that we quite like to have learned sooner.
Yes.
If you look back, and you brought your daughter into the room too, and thinking about her experiences, but particularly with you, if you were to look back at young Belinda, whether it's young Belinda starting that college tenure, what would you share with her now, all these years later, on two sides, the things that you would nip in the bud faster? Don't do that, Belinda. Knock that on the head. I mean, what would be the things that you would want to fix? That's not quite the right word, but you get me, of young Belinda. Stop, young Belinda. And what would you share with her about the opportunity to experience joy. And you've described some very challenging aspects of your life, but nonetheless, and I know you perhaps a little bit more than some of our audience, but your ability to tap into the joy and the beauty and the fun, whether it's music or clothes or other people's stuff or noticing how people tick. So those two things, young Belinda or your young daughter, what would you say, stop right now? Don't do what I do what I say. And what would you share in terms of the joys?
And so what I would share with the young Belinda and with my daughter, whose name is Catherine, is compassion. And so I want to say it again. The word is compassion. The word isn't sympathy. The word isn't empathy. It's compassion. The definition of compassion is being mindful and noticing the suffering of others, and drum roll, here comes the big one, and ourselves, and then taking an action to alleviate it. So once again, the compassion is noticing the suffering of others and ourselves, and then taking an action to alleviate it. It doesn't have to be a big action. It can be lighting a candle. I did that today before I started this podcast because I enjoy candles. A small act, but nevertheless demonstrative to me. And so that would be the message, is to show yourself compassion, Belinda. Now, easier said than done. Just like our 6 in our confident conversations. Very, very straightforward, direct, simple, but not easy. It's been my experience, though, that nothing worth pursuing ever is. I think that's part of us rolling around in our human spacesuits. And one thing I haven't been particularly candid about is the fact that that I'm a total smart aleck. And I could have used a different word, but didn't. Because we mustn't swear on this podcast. So there. But
and what about the joy? Tell me about the joy.
The joy.
What, yeah.
And so the joy, I'm going to quote 2 of my favorites. The first is the Dalai Lama, right? Just a phenomenal dude. And the Dalai Lama says, if you want to make others happy, practice compassion. If you want to make yourself happy, practice compassion. And that translates into joy, because when you do that noticing and you do that taking of an action, I ask everybody viewing, when you take an action, it's a compassionate action, a kind action, do you feel worse or do you feel better? I'm going to go with better. That's my experience. And so the joy of reaching out, the joy of sharing a joke, being able to laugh at myself. Yeah. And for example, I mean, I have a world-class ER department in my bathroom at home. All I do, having been in wound care for a long time, and so, well, I'm sure a lot of people, if they were just joining the podcast mid-go, would think, what kind of crazy woman is this? And indeed I may be, but I'm good with that. Yeah. And so I can be focused on the fact that I'm ready for any wound that could come my way, or I could go, you know what? Somebody comes to my house and gets cut, they're good. They don't need to go to the hospital. They're fine. I've got this covered. And so that's just a small snippet of saying, we take our experience, and because of that awareness, And because of that inner confidence that we've worked so hard to develop, it does not happen overnight.
Yeah.
And it's also by surrounding ourselves with people. And I include you in that group, my friend.
Look back at you. But you also, for me, you call out the ironic as well of life, which is funny. It's just another type of humor, the irony of life. Yeah. And I suppose the necessity to, from time to time, to be playful with those things that you cannot change.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I'm fond of studying the mystics of the world. And so it's said that Catherine of Siena, for which my daughter is named in part, also Catherine Hepburn and Catherine Graham of the Washington Post, but and some family members. But in any event, it was said that Catherine of Siena would sometimes just be exhausted from performing miracle after miracle and helping person after person. So she would just go and hide on the top of her house. And I thought to myself, well, that reminds me of that day sitting on top of my apartment building trying to decide whether I was going to be a flight attendant or go to law school. I don't know. And so I am playful. And I do talk to myself, just like Catherine of Siena did. She would go and sit on top of her house and talk to herself because she didn't want to talk to anyone else. I can relate. This resonates with me. And so the freedom, Kate, the freedom that comes along with embracing the facts that we are presented with in our lives, it is nothing short of that oxygen that I talked about when we started out. For me, the freedom to speak openly about my life has presented me with the freedom to live it and hopefully to be valuable to someone else, because that is what brings me joy.
Look, we have one final closeout question. So, like many podcast series, we're not alone in that we use the tradition of asking a previous guest to craft a question for our next guest. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
Question is, now the law, something of which you know a wee bit about.
Yes.
So law can be sometimes definitive or absolute, but there is nothing absolute in living with uncertainty that comes with disability. How do you rationalize these seemingly opposite states? Different parts of your mind and your life and your skills and your knowledge and your experience. How do you rationalize those two opposites?
Okay, you're right. That was a biggie. You know, well, as usual, you're spot on. So this is a profession in many ways where we are paid to be right. We are paid to achieve the outcome. Our success is determined by how we perform for our clients. And this includes public service. It includes private practice. It includes the executive director or curator of a museum who happens to be the general counsel. Maybe that person is trying to get a particular artist to come, but that person's legal counsel. So, or you know, I always kind of had hoped I'd be general counsel for a zoo, but that didn't work out. But anyway, I'm proud of my law firm. Because of our purpose statement, which involves not only being of service to our clients, but also to the world. And so there's an enormous commitment to DEI. And so what what I came to learn is that I had to balance the narrative of humility, being humble, right? Taking the ego out of the equation in order to develop the inner confidence, which may seem counterintuitive. And also to say, you know what, we can find compassion inside the legal context. But driving straight to your point, you're right. It is inconsistent. People do not often think of lawyers or barristers or solicitors as the synonymous with compassion or being of service. But you know what? The world is changing. And I'm proud to say that my organization is at the forefront of that change globally, and implementing it. So while it's true that my clients hire me in order to achieve an outcome, what I have been blessed to learn and to utilize, I'm going to go back to my mom and thank her, is that the inherent gift of being able to see around corners, the inherent gift of or networkology at PurpleSpace, being able to take pieces of data and people's interests, pull them together to create an outcome. And isn't that the definition of expecting the positive outcome? The key, though, is we have to be prepared, whether it's in my career or yours or anybody who's viewing, that positive outcome may not be the positive outcome we originally envisioned. It could, fasten seatbelts, everybody. It can be bumpy, right? And we have to leave space for the outcome to be actually even bigger or better than we ever could have imagined. And I don't believe that's arrogance at all. I believe it's the absence of arrogance. I believe it's the absence of egoism to say, hey, you know what? I don't know I can't control what others do. I can only control me. And that gets us back to the inside job.
I love it.
And so it's doing the next right thing and the next right thing and the next right thing. And that's the inside job. And it starts with me, and it begins with slowly telling our story to ourselves, to another person, and telling the truth.
Belinda, that's a beautiful way to end our conversation. I know our conversation continues, but for the sake of this podcast, thank you hugely. Thank you hugely for your insight, your wisdom, your unflinching truth, and your compassion. You epitomise this wonderful concept, methodology, this way of being, and we know it has huge resonance in how we will build and continue to build the inner confidence materials and guides. So more information on our website, you know where to go, peeps. You've heard the drill. So we're going to ask Belinda now just to write the question to our next guest. So if you would do that while the camera's rolling, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay. So I'm writing the question for the next guest that you just asked me the surprise question.
Correct.
Right? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, here I go. I'm writing. I'm going to make this a biggie. Okay. Just so you know.
I would think.
I'm telling everybody right now, before they agree to come on your show, this is a biggie, right? Okay. Going seismic here. Done.
Belinda, you are a
I can
star.
hardly wait to tune in to watch the next person.
Belinda, you set the bar high, I have to say. We feel that these podcasts are going to roll and roll and support others to share their story. So thank you again from the bottom of our heart, and we will see you very soon.
Thank you, my friend.
PurpleSpace is on a mission to cascade a universal definition of inner confidence for employees with disabilities. Our organisation members can access a growing suite of learning tools in order to navigate our working worlds while managing disability, deafness, mental health and neurodivergence. Notice the fundamentals. Remember the hurdles. Take individual action. For more information, visit our website www.purplespace.org. PurpleSpace is on a mission to cascade a universal definition of inner confidence for employees with disabilities. Our organisation members can access a growing suite of learning tools in order to navigate our working worlds while managing disability, deafness, mental health and